Director Anand Patwardhan is revered as a trailblazer of Indian documentary. Now in his 70s, he's directed his most personal film, The World is Family. I'm Tom Powers, and this is Pure Nonfiction. Indian documentary filmmakers are on the rise. In recent episodes, I've interviewed directors Vinay Shukla and Shaunak Sen, who both are receiving Peabody Awards this June. Last year, they joined several of their peers in paying tribute to Anand Patwardhan for an article in IndieWire. You can find the link in our show notes. Anand's work digs deep into India's most hot-button political issues. His film, In the Name of God, covered the rise of Hindu fundamentalism. War and Peace focused on the nuclear arms race between India and Pakistan. Jai Bhim Comrade confronted discrimination against the Dalit community. Anand has done it all, financing, producing, distributing, as a true independent. More than once, he's had to battle censorship in court. Even if you're not familiar with his work, you can take inspiration from his perseverance. His latest film, The World is Family, is his most personal. He profiles his parents, whose lives were intertwined with India's fight against British colonialism. His father, Balu, had two brothers who chose diverging paths in the movement, one towards peaceful protest and the other towards violence. His mother, Nirmala, interacted with Gandhi. Through the personal lens of his parents, the film reflects on where India has shifted politically since then. The film had its world premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival last September. That's where I sat down with Anand in front of a live audience. I started by asking how he came to filmmaking.
Well, actually, I had no idea I was going to become a filmmaker. It was 1970, I came to America on a scholarship to Boston, Brandeis University. And Brandeis was the East Coast center of the anti-war movement against Vietnam War. Brandeis and Berkeley on the West Coast were coordinating the anti-war movement for the students. And so I was caught up in that. And the first film that I ever shot were of anti-war protests. So I just borrowed equipment from the theater arts department. And
This would have been 16 millimeter.
16 millimeter Bolex. So yeah, and then I came back to India in 1972 and didn't do any work on film. I worked in a village in Madhya Pradesh for a couple of years, then went to Bihar when a movement began against corruption and
So were you thinking of yourself as a organizer or an activist or what?
activist basically. And I did make, even when I was working in a village, I made a film strip using photographs and a cassette recorder to tell a story, because we had a clinic for tuberculosis patients who wouldn't, after they got slightly better, they would get sick again because they didn't do the follow-up. So it was to motivate people. And then I went to Bihar during the Bihar movement, and there was police violence, and people asked me if I could take photographs to document this. But I went to Delhi and got a friend who had Super 8 cameras, and so with one Super 8 camera and one 8 millimeter camera, we went back and shot that day's protests. And that 8 millimeter camera, if you remember, was reversal stock. So when you projected it, there was no negative. You were actually projecting your own negative, your own reversal. So it would get scratched and ruined. So then I got a 16 millimeter camera and filmed the 8 millimeter projected image to make it 16 millimeter. So that was the rudimentary kind of filmmaking that I did in 74, 75. And in 75, an emergency was declared in India. So the people I'd been working with were all put in jail, and movement went underground. And the film went underground. Although we showed it a little bit, we had to be very careful. We had to be careful even to get the negative from the processing lab. Then I cut a print of the film into pieces and had it smuggled out of the country with whoever was leaving. And at that time, I got
'Cause it was a document
of the
protest.
of the movement which led to the state of emergency being declared. And I got admission to McGill University to do my master's, which saved me from going to jail during the emergency. So I came here to do my studies.
Thank you, Canada.
Thank you, Canada. And then I put together these pieces that I collected that had been smuggled out. And the National Film Board allowed me to edit late at night on the editing tables when nobody was using it. And so it was that's where it all began.
Were you yet thinking of yourself as a filmmaker, or were you thinking of yourself as a activist who was using this as a tool the way you might also use a mimeograph machine?
Yeah. No, I was excited by the medium, but I was still, the filmmaking was a part of everything. It wasn't a divorce from all that.
And then you eventually returned to India, and
I returned to India because in 1977 the emergency ended, and so I could legally go back and even show my film, the one that had been smuggled out. But then I found that some political prisoners had still not been released, even though the new government came to power promising democracy. And so I continued making a film about those who were still in jail. And that was called Prisoners of Conscience. And that was my second film, 79, yeah. And then I came back to Canada to finish my master's because I'd left my studies, yeah. And in Canada, I made a film in 81. I got together with Jim Monroe, and we made a film about the birth of Canada's first farm workers union. It was of immigrant workers from India, Sikh community in British Columbia. So that's called A Time to Rise. And after we made the film, the NFB bought the rights to show it. Yeah.
over time, your films grew more ambitious. The first one, I believe, that played at the Toronto Film Festival was in 1992, called In the Name of God. And since then, you've been back with Father, Son, the Holy War, 94, War and Peace in 2002. I'm not sure if all these have played at Toronto, but big one, Jai Bim Comrade in 2011, and then most recently in Toronto, Reason in 2018. So, quite a body of work. And for a period of time there, you were pretty rare in India for being working as an independent documentarian.
In the initial stages, documentaries, the only documentaries were being made when I first started, were made by the government. They were Films Division of India that made government propaganda films, or not necessarily propaganda films, but made, because in those days, all films, 20-minute films, documentaries used to be shown before every commercial film. So every cinema played 20 minutes before the main film started, which was nice, actually. And so, in fact, the Films Division documented a lot of history, which we wouldn't have had, even though some of it is just ministers cutting ribbons and things like that. Yeah, yeah.
At least we have those ministers recorded.
Yeah, yeah. But there was good cultural films about music and dance and all of those things.
I mean, I'm so interested in this period of your career because I think any filmmaker anywhere in the world, any independent documentary filmmaker, even in a place as richly resourced as North America, feels themselves often in isolation, feels the pressures of what they're of the audiences that they're not reaching, of the money that they're not receiving, of the distribution deals that they're not getting. But the situation that you were working in was extremely independent. And I wonder if you can kind of, paint a picture of what was kind of keeping you going in through the 1990s and onward.
So money was out of the question unless you made government films or corporate films, which were like advertisements in long format advertisements. So, yeah, the money had to be sourced by yourself from your friends and family. And over a period of time, when my film started to be seen more at festivals, etc., some money started to be recovered, and that would get plowed back into the next film. And also, as I said, I luckily developed this relationship with the NFB. So sometimes the NFB helped me with processing or helped me with editing facilities. Yeah, they had this program called Challenge for Change. So they gave me space whenever I was in Canada.
And what kind of community did you have in Bombay? Were you interacting with other independent filmmakers whose work perhaps hasn't traveled as much as yours, or were you working more in a world of activists and journalists? What was the kind of creative support structure?
Activists. There was no filmmaking support structure. But there were activists who would use my films because they would, and these were the days when it was 16 millimeters. So we would lug the projector with us, and sometimes even a generator to get electricity, so we could show the films. And so it was that went on till the mid 90s. 1995 is the first time I switched over to video, but that to high 8 video, and then eventually mini DV. And until the last, Reason was shot on HD, but all films before that were less than HD. They were mini DV or high 8, or films, 16mm.
So last night when we had a screening of The World is Family, you said that in a way all your films have been about the same thing. How would you describe that thing?
Yeah, in the sense that what I meant was that my motivation to make films has always remained more or less the same. I have done different films because there were different issues that I was covering. It was a film against a big dam that was being built that was very destructive, or a film against the homeless, people's homes being demolished to beautify the city. So, yeah. So there were, in initial stages, I was making films about working class issues and issues of poverty. But by the late 80s onwards, religious fundamentalism was growing. So almost the next couple of decades were spent making films about fighting sectarian violence.
And if we watched a retrospective of your work, we would see that from the 1990s to today.
You would see a kind of arc of Indian history because of where India was headed.
You could say arc, you could say spiral downward,
Yes.
Unfortunately.
Of the world, not just India.
Yeah, that's right. I wonder when you reflect on that, the past 30-year span, how you see that sequence of history, and how you think back to the things that you were trying to bring attention to 30 years ago and where it's gone.
The actual lament is that my films were not used well enough. They were there, and they would reach people if they were shown widely, but they didn't get shown widely. So the other thing that I did after Bombay, Our City, which won a national award, but that was a film about the homeless.
This is about slum clearance while gentrification
is happening. We're talking about 1982 to 1985. And that film, after winning the best documentary of the year from the government, I mean, the government gave those national awards, my lawyer friend suggested that why don't we try to put this on national TV? And so we took it to TV, and naturally they said no, because they won't show anything that's critical. So we went to court saying that how can a government give an award to a film, saying it's the best film, and then deny the public the opportunity to see it? And we won that case after a few years. And with that as a template, I fought 7 other cases for other films. So I ended up forcing our national broadcaster to show my films through winning court cases.
So you just kind of glossed over the phrase "a few years." I'm just trying to, contemplate the grind of
Yeah.
taking a case through Indian courts for a few years.
So the film Father, Son, and Holy War, for instance, which was shown at TIFF in 1995, I think, that film, we went to the High Court. We won the case after a few years again, 3 years. And then the government went in appeal to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court sent it back to the High Court saying, you haven't argued this, told the government that they hadn't made a good enough case to stop the telecast. So the government went back to the High Court and did another case. We won that one also in the High Court. So we won 2 cases in the High Court, and they went again to the Supreme Court. So we went to the Supreme Court, and that finally, after 10 years, we won. The Supreme Court gave the order that it could be shown. And the bone of contention in that film was that there was a little bit of bad language in the film. That, I compared the aphrodisiac sellers on the street with the politicians who were also saying, calling out male insecurity, saying the aphrodisiac seller was saying, you buy this and you'll be a real man. And the politician was saying, you kill Muslims and you'll be a real man. So, so that film got an adult certificate from I think I also glossed over that the first round of court cases was to get a censor certificate for the films. Second round was trying to get them on TV. So finally the television said that we can't show it because we have a policy, we don't show adult films on TV. And we had to argue in the Supreme Court that what if it's a film on childbirth, or what if it's a film about AIDS? How are you not going to talk about things that children, you just put it at a later slot when children are asleep. So we won that case again after 10 years. But 10 years through the whole process.
Can you talk about your sense of purpose or your mindset that allows you to carry yourself through a 10-year process? I mean, but many people might say, maybe I should do something else.
Yeah, but we were still showing the films illegally even when we didn't have the permission. But getting the legal right to do it was important because it also, when you win a court case like that, it sets a precedent. And that precedent can be used by other filmmakers. I use the cases that fiction films had used before me, where the Indian Constitution is a good one, and we have Article 19, which guarantees freedom of expression.
You just need to go to court for 10 years to make them live up to it.
Yeah, because the freedom of expression has a clause that says if there's a law and order issue or if it's a threat to the security of the state and all that, then you can't do it. So we had to argue that there's no threat to the state as such, and this is not going to cause law and order problems. And the court rulings were generally quite fair in the end.
Now, many of your films have been multiple hours. Reason, the one that we showed in 2018 that went on to win the top prize at IDFA, was 4 hours long.
4 hours and 20 minutes when it was at TIFF. I shortened
Who's counting
it by 20
after 4
minutes.
hours?
Yeah, right.
A 4-hour film is going to be intimidating to certain audience goers. It requires a certain commitment, an extra commitment to do that. But obviously, you feel that there's a need for that length, and I wonder if you can reflect on the trade-off between audiences that you might lose versus what you feel is important about exploring a subject in depth.
So the smart thing would have been to make it in different parts and release them one at a time, but I didn't do that. I thought as I was editing there was just stuff that I couldn't possibly throw away. It would have been a waste to not say that, and it would have spoiled the argument that was being made. Because my films are often constructed like court cases, not surprisingly maybe, because what I'm doing is presenting the evidence and waiting and allowing the audience to judge them, whether the evidence, what the conclusions are.
It's so interesting in light of how much time you've spent in court trying to make a case for your own films.
Yeah, and so I felt that if I left that argument out or that piece of evidence out, it wouldn't tell the whole story. So it had to be there. And I was hoping that, either broadcasters or university, a lot of my actual distribution happens through the university circuit because I don't get shown on TV, either for reasons of length, but mostly for political reasons. So my bread and butter has been to actually sell my films to university libraries. And when I run out of money, I do university lecture tours and things like that. So these films can easily be used in college situations. You don't have to show the whole film in the same class. You can do it in parts.
And students come ready to engage with issues the way perhaps someone going out to the movies on a Friday night is looking for something else.
I really think that the films would work theatrically if somebody had the guts to allow them. And we actually tried that with War and Peace, which was a 2-hour film, 2 hours plus.
War and Peace comes after the nuclear buildup between India and Pakistan.
It was made after 1998 when Pakistan did nuclear tests. And then I filmed in India, in Pakistan, but also in Hiroshima and Nagasaki and in America because I wanted to know why they dropped the bomb. And in fact, if you look at War and Peace and you look at Oppenheimer, you'll see the similarities. Because similarities and dissimilarities. The same guy who wrote Oppenheimer story, Kai Bird, was interviewed by me 23 years ago. So a younger Kai Bird, more radical than what he sounds like in Oppenheimer. Because in Oppenheimer, you don't get the horror of what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's almost not told from their point of view at all. It's told from the point of view of people who dropped the bomb. I ended up going to Hiroshima and Nagasaki because the hibakusha, the victims of the bomb, every time any country does nuclear tests, they go out, those who are still alive, go out to those countries to tell people their experience of what had happened. So they'd come to India and they saw that I was filming and they invited me back to Hiroshima and Nagasaki and paid my fare. So I'm an accidental filmmaker in the sense that somebody else is helping me out in different ways. And
over the years, you've been part of an international community of filmmakers. They're traveling through festivals, and I know that in Bombay you screen other filmmakers' films to create a dialogue of international cinema.
So I just tell you that story. And in 2003, it was, I think, the Mumbai International Film Festival suddenly brought, by that time, that was the first time the BJP had come to power. The Hindu right-wing party, which is in power today, had come to power in 2000 and, they were in power in 2003. And in 2002, there had been a massacre in Gujarat. Narendra Modi was the chief minister, who's now the prime minister. And under his watch, thousands of Muslims were slaughtered. I mean, Hindus were also killed, to a much lesser extent. And they were worried that there'll be a lot of films about this at the festival. And the festival was an international festival with international guests and everything. So they suddenly imposed the rule that every Indian film would have to have a censor certificate. Until that moment in time, this was a free space where people could show films. But they didn't impose that on the international filmmakers because then nobody would have come. So we did a protest action. We ran a parallel festival from the main one, and we showed all the films that didn't have certificates. And many people who had actually been selected for the official festival walked out, including the international guests. I remember Peter Wintonic and many of my friends were there, and they joined us in the protest, and we did a parallel festival. And after that time, we continued this on a monthly basis in Mumbai. And in other cities, other people are doing similar things. So there is a kind of a parallel movement of showing films.
And so, over time, have you felt a community of independent filmmakers growing in India?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say community yet, but there's potential for that. I mean, we did come together very well in 2003, 2004, but then filmmakers are individuals and they have doing their own thing, so it's not easy to coordinate the activities of all the filmmakers. So there's an informal, everyone knows everyone, and we're trying to show each other's films. Yes.
We've been talking about some of these longer films you've made: War and Peace, Father, Son, the Holy War, Reason. Let's talk about your new film, The World is Family, which is a tight 90 minutes, a film about your parents. You have said, I think you say in the film, that you didn't set out when you started taking video of your parents over the last 3 decades. It was like anyone would collect home movies.
It was a home movie, yeah. It was for a long time a home movie in the sense that I made 3 other films, which were my serious films. Meaning I made War and Peace, I made Jai Bhim Comrade, and I made Reason. And these are like 4-hour films, 3-hour film, and a 2-hour film. So those were my main attention was going there. But I had equipment at home, and either I visited my parents or they came to me where I lived. And so there was always an opportunity to pick up my camera and film what was going on at home.
For people who haven't seen the film, can you tell us a little bit about your mother and father?
So my mother was a potter, a ceramist, and she didn't...
Ceramist who traveled the world.
Traveled the world to different places to learn her craft. Places like England and Germany and Japan and Korea. So wherever the pottery was attractive to her, she went and worked in those potteries. And that meant that she wasn't with me. So I resented her in the sense that I was sent to boarding school rather than when I wanted to be at home. So anyway, that over time, I got over the resentment and started feeling proud of her work. And you know.
When did that happen?
Probably much later. Yeah. Because I hated boarding school. The first one was okay, but then, yeah, it was not a good time.
That was boarding school where?
The first one was in Rishi Valley School in Andhra Pradesh, and then the second one was in Sindhya School in Gwalior. That's the one I didn't like.
So she was living a fulfilled artistic life, but the expense of that was putting you in boarding school.
To some extent. I mean, I met her, and I even once, when I was 12, visited her in her pottery in England, in St. Ives in Cornwall.
And your father, can you describe him?
My father did 100 different jobs in his life. I mean, as he says in the film, he's the only one in the family that didn't go to jail against the British. Everyone else, including his mother, went to jail. And so he was some kind of a breadwinner, had to sustain the family. And and then he did all kinds of jobs, including even distributing B movies to the Middle East from B Indian movies.
Wow.
Yeah. But then at the end of his life, he was a publisher. He became he worked in 3 different publishing companies.
Now, both your parents' families intersected with key figures in India's independence movement. Your mother knew Gandhi. Your father's elder brothers were kind of represented 2 sides of the movement, right? One was
Yeah, my eldest uncle was Gandhian who spent almost 11 years of his life in jail at different times. And his younger brother, Achyut Kaka, was socialist and he went underground. He did go to jail in the beginning and then he said, there's no point going to jail. And they were doing underground revolutionary politics.
So you have this footage that you've kind of shot casually of things like birthdays of your parents, and as you describe in the film, by the time you started shooting your father, he already had some speech impediments.
He had a speech defect. He had heart trouble and then encephalitis. So you couldn't. I could understand him most of the time, but others wouldn't. So I had to put subtitles through the film, even when they're speaking English.
And I asked you a little this at the screen last night, but I wonder if I could ask you again to reflect on, what you learned about keeping family archives and filming your parents.
So there were lots of. I knew the rough story of the family, but I didn't know the details. So it's only when I started doing interviews with both my parents and my father's younger brother who was alive, who all 3 of them had incredible memories. So from them I got the detailed story, which I didn't know.
And your parents were always supportive of your filmmaking?
Yeah, they were supportive of anything I did. They were very, that's what probably you get from the film is the kind of love that exists in the family, not just between my parents and me, but also the larger family. So there was no restriction. I mean, we're talking about 2nd generation socialists. So there was no religious hang up. There was nothing that said you have to go and make money.
I know people who have watched the film, who have followed your work, or who have intersected with you before, and maybe think of you as an elder figure that they have a lot of respect for, and they're very touched to watch your relationship with your parents. That even as a grown man, we're still a kind of kid in our relationship with our parents.
Yeah, and I think maybe outside of India, in the West, that maybe not as common because people, I don't know if it's true for everybody, probably not true, but that people break away from their families, that they become units of them, you and your wife, and new family rather than the old family. But we have I mean, that's happening in India as well, but there's still an older tradition of joint family.
I want to ask you about your friendship with Alanis Obamswin, who came to your screening for its premiere a couple days ago. Can you talk about that friendship? You have parallel careers.
Yeah, well, she's an amazing person, and apart from being a wonderful filmmaker, she's a wonderful human being. And so anytime we're in the same vicinity, we try to meet each other. And she was here in Toronto for her own work. And I had brought her to India many years ago to show her films at the Mumbai International Film Festival. In those days, they listened to my advice. But and she came and she was wonderful. She sang as well on stage. And then she came with me to Pune to meet my parents. She lived with my family. So she and my mother got along wonderfully. So because they're both artists.
So, The World is Family. Maybe I can just ask you about the title, The World is Family. Where does that expression come from?
So I stole it back from the government that uses the same title The government, now they're doing G20 going on in India right now, Biden, and everybody was supposed to be there. So their slogan is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which is the world is family. But, you know, these are not the guys whose family you want to belong to. So I was reclaiming that because, in fact, India is a bundle of contradictions. And even traditionally, even the Hindu tradition has this deep division in how people see the world. There's one strand that is the caste system, that it actually divides the entire society and makes a hierarchy where one community does all the dirty work, who are considered untouchables. And there's a community on the top, the priests and the warriors and the merchants who live off the fat of the land. And so that is a dominant existing structure. But also in ancient literature, you would find the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is family, that actually all human beings and all creatures are united, that we're part of one whole.
Last week, there was an article published in IndieWire of a new generation of Indian filmmakers, including Sean XN, who made All That Breathes, that was nominated for an Oscar. Vinay Shukla, who was here at the festival last year with his film While We Watched. And these 6 filmmakers were describing what Anand's legacy meant to them, and in many cases what Anand personally had meant to them, things that you had done for young filmmakers. So I wonder if you feel conscious of that, of mentoring
So this is the younger generation of filmmakers who are like in their 20s and 30s now, but we have been showing films for a long, so they don't remember the days when we lugged our 16mm equipment everywhere. And they were already now in a little easier time when we just
bring a little video projector.
A little video projector, yeah.
But do you feel conscious of an example you set that other people are following?
No, I felt very good, but it's a rare thing actually for filmmakers to be so supportive. Yeah, because usually there's a lot of rivalry, and not everybody celebrates that film got into a festival and mine didn't, and that sort of thing happens. But yeah, that's why this is precious actually, and hopefully will keep growing.
I want to thank Anand Patwardhan for speaking with me. His new film, The World is Family, has its U.S. premiere at the New York Indian Film Festival on June 1st. See our show notes for a link to his website. We recently launched a newsletter called Doc Voices, written by Anisha Javeri. You can subscribe on Substack. Thanks to our team, series producer Hannah Nordenswan, partnership manager Bella Racklin, and web designer Cross Strategy. Our theme music is composed by Andre Williams, and our executive producer is Raphael Nehausen. I'm Tom Powers. Follow us on Instagram and visit our website at purenonfiction.net.